Hello everyone. In this video we will go through the exam questions related to TOGAF, that is the Open Group Architecture Framework, along with their quick explanation. So, let's get started. Let's talk about this question. Which of the following ADM phases is where SBBs first appear in the ADM cycle? Options we have: A phase, AB phase, B, C phase, D phase, E. Correct answer for this question is option D, phase E. Because SBBs appear in phase E of the ADM, where product-specific building blocks are considered for the first time. SBBs define what products and components will implement the functionality, thereby defining the implementation. Let's talk about next question. Which of the following documents acts as the deliverable container for the business, data, application, and technology architectural artifacts? Options we have: A. Architecture contract, B. Architecture definition document, C. Architecture requirements specification, D. Architecture roadmap. Correct answer for this question is option B, the architecture definition document. Because it is the deliverable container for the core architectural artifacts created during a project and for important related information. The architecture definition document spans all architecture domains, business, data, application, and technology, and also examines all relevant states of the architecture, baseline, transition, and target. Let's talk about next question. Architecture views and architecture viewpoints are used by an architect to capture or model the design of a system architecture. Which one of the following statements is true? Options we have: A. An architecture view is the perspective of an individual stakeholder. B. An architecture viewpoint is the perspective of an individual stakeholder. C. Different stakeholders always share the same architecture views. D. Different stakeholders always share the same architecture viewpoints. Correct answer for this question is option B. Because an architecture view is what you see. An architecture viewpoint is where you are looking from, the vantage point or perspective that determines what you see. Let's talk about next question. According to the TOGAF Standard, in which ADM phase does the initial implementation planning occur? Options we have: A. Phase A, architecture vision. B. Phase B, business architecture. C. Phase C, information systems architectures. D. Phase E, opportunities and solutions. Correct answer for this question is option D, phase E, opportunities and solutions. Because it conducts initial implementation planning and the identification of delivery vehicles for the architecture defined in the previous phases. Let's talk about next question. Which of the following best completes the sentence, the enterprise continuum? Options we have: A. Describes a database of open industry standards. B. Is an architecture framework. C. Is a technical reference model. D. Provides methods for classifying artifacts. Correct answer for this question is option D. Because the enterprise continuum is a model providing methods for classifying architecture and solution artifacts as they evolve from generic foundation architectures to organization-specific architectures. The enterprise continuum comprises two complementary concepts: the architecture continuum and the solutions continuum. Let's talk about next question. Which phase of the ADM is used to finalize a set of transition architectures that will support implementation? Options we have: A. Phase D, B. Phase E, C. Phase F, D. Phase G. Correct answer for this question is option C, Phase F. Because it confirms the transition architectures defined in Phase E with the relevant stakeholders and finalizes them. Let's talk about next question. Which one of the following statements best describes the ADM guidelines and techniques? Options we have: A. Guidelines address different usage scenarios, including different process styles and specialist architectures that can be adapted in the Admiral. B. Guidelines address different usage scenarios that cannot be adapted directly into the ADM iteration process. C. Techniques support different usage scenarios that can be adapted directly into the ADM iteration process. D. Techniques support different usage scenarios, including different process styles and specialist architectures that can be adapted in the Admiral. Correct answer for this question is option A. Because TOGAF 9 Part 3 contains a collection of guidelines and techniques for use in applying the TOGAF Standard, and the Admiral. The guidelines document how to adapt the ADM process and specialist architecture styles, whereas the techniques are used when applying the ADM process. Let's talk about next question. According to the TOGAF Standard, the recommended dimensions used to define the scope of an architecture include all the following, except. Options we have: A. Architecture domains. B. Breadth. C. Depth. D. Subject matter. Correct answer for this question is option D. Subject matter. Because the recommended dimensions to define the scope of an architecture activity are breadth, depth, time period, and architecture domains. Let's talk about next question. Which of the following classes of architectural information within the architecture repository defines processes that support governance of the architecture repository? Options we have: A. Architecture capability. B. Architecture landscape. C. Architecture metamodel. D. Governance log. Correct answer for this question is option A. Architecture capability. Because the architecture capability defines the parameters, structures, and processes that support governance of the architecture repository. Let's talk about next question. In which ADM phase are the business principles, business goals, and strategic drivers validated? Options we have: A. Preliminary phase. B. Phase A, architecture vision. C. Phase B, business architecture. D. Phase H, architecture change management. Correct answer for this question is option B. Phase A, architecture vision. Because it includes the validation of business principles, goals, strategic drivers, and also key performance indicators, KPIs. Let's talk about next question. What TOGAF deliverable identifies changes that are needed to the current architecture requirements and specification, and also documents the implications of change? Options we have: A. Requirements impact assessment. B. Architecture vision. C. Gap analysis results. D. Architecture landscape. Correct answer for this question is option A. Requirements impact assessment. Because throughout the ADM, new information is collected relating to an architecture. As this information is gathered, new facts may come to light that invalidate existing aspects of the architecture. A requirements impact assessment assesses the current architecture requirements and specification to identify changes that should be made and the implications of those changes. Let's talk about next question. Which of the following best describes the purpose of the TOGAF TRM? Options we have: A. To provide a generic framework for IT governance. B. To provide a list of standards. C. To provide a method for architecture development. D. To provide a visual model and core terminology for generic platform services. Correct answer for this question is option D. Because the TOGAF Foundation architecture is an architecture of generic services and functions that provides a foundation on which more specific architectures and architectural components can be built. This foundation architecture is embodied within the Technical Reference Model, TRM, which provides a model and taxonomy of generic platform services. Let's talk about next question. Where does the Integrated Information Infrastructure Reference Model fit in terms of the enterprise continuum? Options we have: A. Common systems architectures. B. Foundation architectures. C. Industry architectures. D. Organization-specific architectures. Correct answer for this question is option A. Common systems architectures. Because the TOGAF Integrated Information Infrastructure Reference Model is a common systems architecture that focuses on the requirements, building blocks, and standards relating to the vision of boundaryless information flow. Let's talk about next question. Which section of the TOGAF Standard describes the processes, skills, and roles to establish and operate an architecture function within an enterprise? Options we have: A. Architecture development method. B. ADM guidelines and techniques. C. Architecture content framework. D. Architecture capability framework. Correct answer for this question is option D. Because the architecture capability framework discusses the organization, processes, skills, roles, and responsibilities required to establish and operate an architecture practice within an enterprise. Let's talk about next question. Complete the sentence. To promote effective architectural activity within the enterprise, the TOGAF Standard recommends the establishment of. Options we have: A. Enterprise architecture capability. B. IT Governing Board. C. Program Management Office. D. Quality Assurance Department. Correct answer for this question is option A. Because an enterprise architecture capability, or architecture capability, in the context of the TOGAF standard, is the ability for an organization to effectively undertake the activities of an enterprise architecture practice. So, that's it in this video. I hope you like the content of this video and it will help for your exam preparation. If you want more content related to this exam, then like this video and mention in comments section. Also don't forget to subscribe to get latest update about the next video.